let's say in this individual that was eating 1,300 calories, their maintenance calories are at 2,000, and maybe their weight loss calories for their activity and everything are 1,800. So we know that they're under eating. We know that they will lose weight at 1,800 calories, but they're not going to lose weight now because they're just not eating enough. And so normally what I do is get this individual up to the 2,000 calories. We really shouldn't see the weight change that much. Like, we really shouldn't see the weight change that much. If it's changing significantly, then I'm thinking there is some significant adrenal situation, mitochondria situation that's making it absolutely impossible for this individual to move forward. So it's, okay, let's back it up. Let's look at the mitochondria. What do we need for adrenal support to just get you regulated? Are there traumas going on? Are you in a really difficult relationship right now that's super toxic, terrible time at work? Those sorts of things, it's going to be more challenging for us. And we're just going to gain weight and feel terrible all the time.
I love, 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 love being interviewed by other practitioners where we can just kind of go back and forth on our thoughts. And Dr. Bryan Rade asked me to be on his podcast recently. His podcast is called the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. And he's from Halifax. And I love chatting with Canadians because I'm a Canadian and we just get each other. And so, yeah, Dr. Bryan asked me to come on his show. We had such a good conversation. And afterwards, I asked him, hey, can I grab this audio so I could share it with my listeners? And he agreed. So this is an interview that Dr. Bryan Rade is doing of me. We're talking about weight loss, specifically keto weight loss, keto frustrations. And then at the very end, he asks me about lab work and markers. And you know how much I love blood chemistry, love chatting about it, love using it in my one-on-one practice. So we just had to go there. So if you're not familiar with Dr. Bryan, he works with individuals wishing to correct a current health concern or work on general health promotion. His practice primarily focuses on complex chronic illness, persistent Borrelia infections and co-infections, mold illness, integrative oncology, the biomedical treatment of autism, PANS or PANDAS, neurological disorders, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, aka SIBO, and chronic pain. He combines his knowledge of both conventional and complementary medical theory to provide his patients with the most effective, research-based, and up-to-date care possible. In his practice, he strives to promote the concept of doctor as teacher and encourages everyone to take an active role in obtaining and maintaining their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Again, his podcast is called Overcoming Chronic Illness. If you go to Google and just type that in, you'll find it. Otherwise, you can go to overcomingchronicillness.podbean.com. His website is eastcoastnaturopathic.com, and you can find him on Instagram, dr.Bryan with a Y, Rade.nd. I'll include some of these links in the show notes. Okay, let's cut over to Dr. Bryan Rade interviewing me on his show, Overcoming Chronic Illness. Hey, my name is Leanne Vogel. I'm fascinated with helping women navigate how to eat, move, and care for their bodies using a low-carb diet. I'm a small-town holistic nutritionist turned 3-time international best-selling author turned functional medicine practitioner, offering telemedicine services around the globe to women looking to better their health and stop second-guessing themselves. I'm here to teach you how to wade through the wellness noise to get to the good stuff that'll help you achieve your goals. We're supporting your low-carb life beyond the if it fits your macros conversation. Hormones, emotions, relationship to your body, workouts, letdowns, motivation, blood work, detoxing, metabolism. I'm providing the tools to put your motivation into action. Think of it like quality time with your bestie mixed with a little med school so you're empowered at your next doctor visit. Get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn about your body and how to care for it better. This is the Keto Diet Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Bryan. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. So Leanne, if you don't mind, just now we have the official bio behind us here. Would you mind just speaking to how you got involved working with folks dealing with complex chronic illness? I've known quite a few certified holistic nutritionists over time, and they certainly don't all dabble in parasites and mold and heavy metal toxicity and heavier stuff like that. So do you mind sharing how you got into this space?
We really don't, because we don't learn about it, unfortunately. And I know that there's only so much time that you can pack and so much content that you can pack into such a short period of time when you're educating individuals. And that's why, if there's any practitioners listening, your standard run-of-the-mill education is not going to provide you with those details that you're just going to get over years and years and years of experience. And so when I graduated, I was primarily helping individuals with their nutrition. I would take clients to the grocery store. I would show them how to make standard choices that were healthier and just really integrate different actions in regards to their diet. And by far, when we're talking about root cause issues like parasites, metals, mold, Lyme, we always have to look at diet first. If the diet is a train wreck, then that's where we need to start. And 100%, I don't discount the power of a strong diet and making legitimate changes for our health overall with food. So fast forward a whole bunch of years, and I went on my own personal journey through nutrition over time. And that's when I found the ketogenic diet, restored my period, because I had amenorrhea for 7 years, where every doctor said I would not get my period back. This is the way that life was going to be. I was in my mid-20s being told that I would never, ever ovulate, menstruate, none of these things, and that my hormones would just always be low. I did blood work just last week, and my estrogen is absolutely perfect. Progesterone, DHEA, all those markers that doctors said I would never have normal. And so I really used the ketogenic diet for this. And while I was coaching individuals on the ketogenic diet, we would get in a ketogenic space, and then they would just get kicked out of ketosis, or like things would happen where they couldn't lose weight. And I'm like, it doesn't make any sense to me. They're eating well, they're moving their bodies. Why aren't they losing weight? And kind of at the same time, because I find this always just happens to me, maybe other practitioners also, of like, at the same time that I'm learning with people, I'm also learning with my body. And it just so happens that oftentimes it aligns. And so around the same time, I was having a lot of liver issues, which made no sense at all. And I went in for testing. We found a bunch of cysts in my liver. I did some stool testing and found out that I had Entamoeba histolytica, which is a pathogenic parasite that over time will ruin your liver. And that was just like, how, this makes no sense. How do I have a parasite? How is it attacking my liver? Like, what is the world? And so that was in 2019. And so I started really delving into what parasites were. And then that kind of took me to metals and mold and exposures that I had had in a moldy apartment that I thought was just, you know, you live in mold, you fix the mold. Okay. Like, how could this affect you? And so at the same time, I was attracting more and more clients that were dealing with the same things. And so that's kind of how I kind of fumbled into this. And so also in 2019, I realized that I just didn't have the tools available to me to be able to coach individuals through this. So I took 4 different programs geared toward chronic issues, including functional blood work, which has been just so incredibly powerful a tool that I can guide clients through using basic lab markers to understand what chronic illnesses they're being affected with without having to run $200 to $600 labs that are just inaccessible for most people. And so, yeah, that's kind of what takes us here today, where I coach on a variety of different things, from just those standard nutrition practices, which again, so key, absolutely essential, all the way through, you name it, parasites, GI testing, H. pylori, metals, mold, chemicals, viral components, Lyme, all the things.
A lot of things.
Yeah, it is really a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, the backstory there. And that, yeah, so many of us just, you know, this kind of path kind of finds us, so to speak, in some way, shape or form and through various means. So it's, yeah, it's a good backstory. A couple of questions based on what you said. So when you say ketogenic diet, is that, and it just seems like there are, I know, somewhat ironically, there are different definitions of what a ketogenic diet might be. So like when you're saying, you know, ketogenic diet, is that like, you know, you're getting your blood ketones and your blood glucose, like, you know, at a 1-to-1 ratio, kind of like full blown ketosis? Are you talking like, oh, I got like, you know, just a +1 on my ketones on my urine dipstick? Like how ketogenic are we talking here?
Yeah, so it really depends on the individual. If somebody comes to me with severe mold illness, the first thing I'm going to say is, do you want to try a ketogenic diet? Because it's so fabulous for helping with a lot of mold issues. If an individual just wants to lose weight, it might not be my number one choice depending on how they're eating. But there's, like you said, Bryan, there's a vast array of different ways to approach the ketogenic diet. And if you really look at it, this has really been helpful for me in understanding how to explain this is if you think of just glucose burning, the ability to burn carbohydrates as fuel, which many of us are very accustomed to, there are multiple diets within that allow us to burn carbohydrates as fuel. Like if you just think of paleo and FODMAP and antihistamine and just all the different types of primal, which is different than paleo, just a non-standard American diet, a standard American diet. These are all ways that we burn glucose as energy. Then on the flip side, when we're in a ketogenic state, there are multiple different ways to approach this. So, a Parkinson's patient is going to have a very different ketogenic diet than a woman who wants to lose 10 pounds to get her brain fog under control. And so primarily my focus, just to do a blanket statement on the ketogenic diet, is we're eating a high fat, low carbohydrate diet with moderate to high protein. There was a time where a lot of individuals online were talking about gluconeogenesis as a state where if we had too much protein, it would kick us out of ketosis. And while if you're a diabetic, that may be important to you to really watch the protein, most individuals, specifically women, do not eat enough protein. And so the approach that I generally take to a ketogenic diet is going to usually be a little bit higher in carbohydrates so we can get a lot of the micronutrients in, and a little bit higher in protein so that we're not breaking down muscle. And that's the big thing about keto, and where people get really caught up is if I don't see the scale move, then keto's not working. And oftentimes I've seen when the scale is moving down, it's usually because we are losing muscle. And so it really depends on the individual, but I prioritize micronutrients over the macronutrient profile so we can make sure that we are benefiting the gut. If we look at most individuals on a ketogenic diet, when I am able to do a stool test with them, they're Fasobacterium and Akkermansia, which are two key bacteria in the gut. When these two are low, there's going to be massive issues across the mucosal layer. And so if you're eating a low carb diet, you're not feeding these bacteria and you will have issues in the future. And so just being mindful of that, of if we want to keep those keystone bacteria like really healthy, add blackberries to your diet, add raspberries to your diet. It may mean that you're a little bit higher in carbohydrates, but will eliminate that concern further down the line of these lower bacteriums. And even too with Akkermansia, it will affect our glucose control. And so if you're on a ketogenic diet and you're eating low carb and you can't control your glucose and it's spiking up in the evenings and you just can't control it, it could be because of the gut bacteria that you're not feeding. And so it's never simple of just like, do this and everything will work. It's really these pieces, and the ketogenic diet is powerful, but going too strict with it, I haven't seen overly helpful in those just looking to benefit their health long term.
So if I'm kind of paraphrasing correctly here, it's really more about trying to match the right makeup, like kind of the more bird's eye view makeup of the diet for the patient, given their health goals, their underlying health concern, or underlying health issues, as opposed to like necessarily being concerned about seeing objective signs of ketosis on blood tests or urine tests. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, if you need to go that deep, you can, but I think initially a good rule of thumb is just get comfortable with carbohydrates, what they are, what they're in. And you may find that you eat a ton of carbs that just aren't benefiting you. And so start to be strategic around the types of carbs that you are eating. Like kiwi is going to be far better in fiber and just micronutrients than a fruit roll up, so making that simple change, very similar carbohydrate amount, around 15 grams of carbs, but totally different structure. And so just being mindful of that far more than, do you have ketones in your urine? Are you testing for ketones in your blood? Yeah, you can go there if you need to, and some chronically ill individuals may have to, but I think a really good first step is just understanding the carbohydrates that you're consuming, the fats that you're consuming, where that protein amount is, and kind of switching things up a little bit with those macros.
And oddly enough, the fruit roll up comment just reminded me to, as per usual, remind everyone that nothing we're talking about today should be construed as medical advice. This is all for informational purposes only. If you need any health advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. And also, if you're the folks behind fruit roll ups, please don't sue us for throwing you out of the bus. But I fully agree. Fruit roll ups, awful choice almost all the time. And yes, kiwi, definitely a better choice. Yeah. Just we could sum up the whole podcast right there. Kiwi better than fruit roll-ups. And a conversation.
Exactly. And mic drop. No.
There we go. Exactly. Yeah. And I've got a big mic to drop over here.
Yeah, seriously.
No mic. Yeah.
Serious.
Yeah. I need to get a slicker thing like the AirPods or something like that. But just, I love my snowball. So one other follow-up question, Leanne. So just you mentioned kind of earlier in our chat that our kind of reference, like, folks were like, yeah, they're following, a ketogenic diet, or they're, should be, they're active, all this, and yet they're not losing weight. And I can say from, firsthand experience and on behalf of my patients who like fall into that category, it's like such a frustrating head scratcher kind of situation. And, we have our methods here in my clinic to try to sleuth out why the heck that's happening. But would you be able to share just some of the clinical pearls that you found in your years of working with folks that have, like, what are some of the things that have kind of cracked those cases, so to speak? Like, you have a patient who's, say, seems to be on like a good diet, like, they're following a keto diet, they're active. What are some of the missing pieces of the puzzle that sabotage their weight loss goals?
Yeah, not eating enough. I see this over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Like, not eating enough for the activity, not eating enough for the goals, and really having to upregulate the metabolism. And oftentimes that's the best way that I've found to do that is an incremental increase in overall calories at around 50 to 100 grams weekly. So let's just say you're sitting at 1,300 calories and you're crushing your ketogenic diet. Like, your macros are on point, you feel good, but you're not losing weight. And let's say that you really should be eating around, let's just make the math easy, 2,000 calories. You're probably not going to lose weight. And so what I would suggest is every week increasing your calories by around 50 to 100. So week 1 would be 1,400 calories and week 2 would be 1,500 calories. If you find like you're gaining weight too quickly, slow it down 50 calories the next week, and just daily increasing those calories on a week by week basis. So number 1 is not eating enough, especially with women. I notice this a lot. On the flip side, the other thing is snacking, or like not eating at proper meal times. So oftentimes what I notice a lot of keto individuals doing is having like mixed nuts at their desk and just having a handful and being like, it's keto, this is great, these macros are awesome, or look at macadamia nuts, there's so much fat, and that they're overeating in fat. So kind of on the flip side of that is just the overeating and the not proper meal times. And so really setting a clear intention of having 2 or 3 meals a day, like square meals a day. Another one is fasting, either fasting too much or not enough. Generally speaking, the women that I'm working with primarily do too much fasting. And so if you're having an 18 or 24-hour fast every other day or every day, where you're fasting 18 hours, you eat 1 meal, then you fast for 24 hours, you eat 1 meal, you fast for, it's just too much fasting. And then it goes into just not eating enough. I think another big piece is liver dysregulation. So the liver is required massively in the production of ketones and being able to properly make this diet work. And so if your liver is like mine was a couple of years ago and just not healthy, or if you had your gallbladder removed 20 years ago, when you have your gallbladder removed, it doesn't really remove the problem. It just removes the organ that was responding to the problem. And so really delving deep into what's going on with my liver. Where's my ALT, AST, GGT at? Where's my alkaline phosphatase? What is my bilirubin looking like from a functional perspective? And really delving deep, do I need to work on my liver drainage a little bit more? The number one way, as long as you don't have an experience with gallstones and you still have your gallbladder or blockages or those sorts of things, are castor oil packs. And really getting consistent with those, generally speaking, every other day or maybe 2 to 3 times per week, working really slow in the introduction at 5 minutes and just working your way up, I find super beneficial to getting the liver on board, as well as bitters, something super simple, regardless of where you are. You can even make your own if they're not available. I know in Canada, it's kind of hard to get certain supplements, especially if you're doing things on your own. And so making your own bitters, or even just actually buying an organic orange and cutting up the peel, like the rind, and eating that as a little snack can really be helpful in increasing the bitter content in your diet. Arugula is another good bitter food, dark chocolate. So really focusing on the liver, because when the liver is not optimal, your ketogenic diet is not going to be optimal. And then sleep. So a lot of women, as we reach 40, 45, we start dealing with perimenopause, maybe even before that. Our livers are not super awesome. Our sleep gets dysregulated. We're not getting a good enough sleep. So we're not generating a good amount of ketones. Our glucose is sideways. Really prioritizing sleep and understanding what's affecting your sleep. Number one thing here is usually a drop in progesterone. And so oftentimes usually in this area, things like vitamin B6 could be helpful. Progesterone, topically or orally, could be helpful to just regulate that sleep, in addition to don't watch TV in bed, and don't go to bed at 11 o'clock and expect to have a good sleep, and sleeping in a temperature controlled room, or getting something like a chilly sleep, and those certain things. Sleep is so, so, so important. So it's not just if it fits your macros, everything's going to be fine. Those are the key things that I see over and over and over and over and over again as affecting people and not allowing them to hit their weight loss goals.
A little while back, I was sharing how I use apple cider vinegar to keep me from having acne. And then a bunch of people reached out like, what do you mean apple cider vinegar helps with your acne? So one of the main reasons I get acne is because I'm stressed, and it lowers my hydrochloric acid, which then lowers my ability to break down food, which then affects my gut, which then shows up on my skin. So I've been using Paleo Valley's apple cider vinegar complex to nip this in the bud for years. It helps with cravings. It helps with blood sugar, skin, complexion. Increases hydrochloric acid, digestion and function and indigestion. It's made with organic ingredients to minimize pesticide exposure. It's easy to take. It's just one capsule. It's made with apple cider vinegar, lemon, turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, and Paleo Valley has a 60-day, 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're looking for something to just help with cravings, blood sugar, your complexion, increase your hydrochloric acid, help with your digestion, maybe you're adding apple cider vinegar to your meals or on the side and it's just not convenient, head on over to paleovalley.com/keto to get 15% off your order. Again, that's paleovalley.com/keto for 15% off.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And just folks listening, it's always great when someone who's been in a given field kind of lists off some of their top, in this case, I have 5 reasons. It's a lot of clinical pearls of hey, this is what I've seen in clinical practice. So it's hope folks are listening and paying attention, I should say, to those details. So thank you for sharing that. Just circling back to the increasing increasing calories rather by say 50 to 100 per week, which I've heard other folks talk about that as well. I know I've talked to some patients about that before, and it'd be easier to ask them to change their religion than ask them to eat more calories when they're trying to lose weight. And especially if they're increasing them and see their weight increasing, as you said, if you're going up by 100 a week and your weight's increasing, only increased by 50, it's oh my gosh, small miracle to convince someone to stick with that game plan. So if just for folks listening, if they're also thinking yeah, what the heck what is she talking about? So is it the type of thing where say you're increasing their calories by 50 to 100 per week, getting, finally you get up to say that 2,000 that they're actually expending per day. And then does it kind of hit this magical point where then they start losing weight at an appropriate or an expected rate, or how does that play out clinically as a rule?
Yeah. So let's say in this individual that was eating 1,300 calories, their maintenance calories are at 2,000, and maybe their weight loss calories for their activity and everything are 1,800. So we know that they're under eating. We know that they will lose weight at 1,800 calories, but they're not going to lose weight now because they're just not eating enough. And so normally what I do is get this individual up to the 2,000 calories. We really shouldn't see the weight change that much. We really shouldn't see the weight change that much. If it's changing significantly, then I'm thinking there is some significant adrenal situation, mitochondria situation that's making it absolutely impossible for this individual to move forward. So it's, okay, let's back it up. Let's look at the mitochondria. What do we need for adrenal support to just get you regulated? Are there traumas going on? Are you in a really difficult relationship right now that's super toxic, terrible time at work? Those sorts of things, it's going to be more challenging for us. And we're just going to gain weight and feel terrible all the time. So that's one piece. But slowly but surely, we should be able to increase the calories. So in this individual, their first week, they're eating 1,400 calories per day. Then the next week, 1,500 calories per day. And if we just notice we're going too fast, like I said, slow it down. But we really shouldn't see that much of a change. And we also have to understand that fat weighs less than muscle. So if we are combining this with a workout strategy, whether it be a step goal or a workout goal of some sort, primarily lifting in some capacity, 2 to 3, 4, and maybe 5 if I get to choose times per week, we should see the weight start to shift a little bit. But if it's more than 5 to 7 pounds, then there's something else going on. And also a good measurement too, to kind of get your mind out of the scale situation, is understanding that body composition looks different on different people. So I've had clients that have weighed 190 pounds when we start working together, and their body completely changes, have 6-pack abs and the whole bit, and maybe they're at 180. Okay. So it's their body is tight, their lower fat percentage, but we've just recomped their entire body. And so we shouldn't really see more than a 5 to 7 pound gain, depending on goals and those sorts of things. But once we get up to that 2,000 calories, then we can either increase our movement to start cutting or removing the calories burned, or increasing our calories burned, or we can drop the intake down slowly to 1,800 calories. And you should be able to then lose weight at that time. But you're right. Telling clients that, hey, like, what if we increase calories? It's like the last thing that people want to do. Generally for those clients, we choose to meet once a week to like go through things. What have you eaten? What are your macros? How are you feeling? What are your inches? Send me your pictures, because that scale will just make you feel not so great. But if you're seeing inches remain the same or even decrease, but the scale is not moving or even increasing, well, there's something else going on. You're getting tighter, something's happening. And so trying to look at more data points than just, oh my goodness, I haven't lost weight, or oh my goodness, I'm up 1.5 pounds. Try something tomorrow morning, jump on the scale, drink, 24 ounces of water, then jump on the scale again. The weight's going to be different. And so how you store your water on any given day, especially on a ketogenic diet, where on keto, if you increase your carbs just a little bit, each gram of carb is going to carry with it around 4 grams of water. And so if you increase your carbs one day, you're going to weigh more tomorrow. Is it fat? No, it's water. And so just constantly preaching yourselves these truths over and over and over and over again is really helpful. So you should be able to lose weight at that, maybe even that 2,000 calorie amount. It might not be that you are actually seeing the scale move, but you're seeing your body change. And that's what we care about. And that's where the inches and pictures of yourself are a good reminder of how you're progressing.
Okay. Well, thank you for that info. And I would like to move to a different topic. I'm just going to ask you one more follow-up question here, because again, I'm curious what your answer would be, and I'm sure folks listening would be curious about this too. And then I promise to the listeners, we'll move on to something that's not just about weight management. With that being said, for folks listening, where it's like this has been their toughest thing to conquer, I'm sure this is really valuable. So thank you for getting into this with me. So folks listening might be wondering, like, so Leanne, you spin a good yarn, but how the heck is it that eating more calories would cause me to lose weight? Like, what's the approximate mechanism there? Like, I'm burning 2,000 a day with my activity. I want to be in a bit of a calorie deficit, so I'm actually losing some weight over time. So maybe I'll aim for 1,800. How is it that only eating 1,300 is somehow like interfering with my ability to lose weight?
Yeah. So your base metabolic rate, depending on this individual, is really how many calories your body needs to just function. That's like beating heart, growing nails, hair growing. One of the number one things that I see in individuals that aren't eating enough is that they're losing a lot of hair, that their skin is really like loose and dull and just like not great. And because the body's just deprioritizing things, you are not eating enough. It's like having a car and saying, well, I don't have enough money to fill it with gas, so I'm just going to see if the car will run on empty. Like, you're just not going to get very far. And so, unfortunately, in a car, the car can't say, okay, we're getting close to empty, so we're going to like stop burning as much fuel. But the body is so innately just incredible that it's like, wait a minute, we're not getting enough. So we're going to just kibosh the whole hormone balancing thing. We're going to cut out all the hair growing and nails and skin. We don't care about that. We just need to keep the heart beating. Even the digestive system will shut down. Constipation, number one thing, I'm always like, are you eating enough? Because if you're not eating enough, your peristalsis of your body is just not going to work properly, and you're not going to be pooing regularly. And so, yeah, you want to be in a deficit from how much you're burning. If your base metabolic rate, let's do easy math, is 1,500 per day, and then your activities and everything else puts you at 2,000, but you're eating 1,300, the math doesn't make sense. You're at way too much of a deficit for way too long of a time to make any significant changes. Like max deficit, max would be 20%. And that's a lot. And that's really challenging long-term to do. So if the individual was eating 2,000 calories, a 10% deficit would be 200 calories. And I think that that's a really good place to aim for. Yeah. So it's just not enough. You just can't work with that. It's like trying to pay a bill and saying, well, it's $100, but I only have 20. No, you owe 100. And so that's kind of how the body works too.
Thank you for that. And just kind of circling back to something you said, like where it's, just we break that down, like basal metabolic rate, like, it's to fuel your basic metabolism. And, what is your metabolism? When we talk about metabolism as being like this, thing is like, I have a good metabolism, bad metabolism, high, fast, or slow or fast or whatever. But ultimately the metabolism, to my understanding is, and sorry, I'm just saying this to the audience, I'm sure you know all this,
Yep.
Leanne. I'm not schooling you here, but just for folks listening, your metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions that occur in your body. And the vast majority of those chemical reactions require energy. And so if we don't have the raw material to make that energy, then the metabolism is not going to work. So if you're thinking like, this still doesn't make sense, like, it's like, well, just if you think about it in that term, like, your basal metabolic rate, bare minimum needed to run your metabolism, to run those, all those reactions. So you're gonna have a really poor metabolism if you don't have the energy to run your metabolism. It's a little bit, kind of tough to wrap your head around, I think, sometimes, but that's kind of the in and out of it. So anything I said there that you wouldn't agree with, Leanne, or is that
I agree with you 100%. And also, because we're speaking to individuals that are dealing with chronic illness, you're not going to be able to recover from a chronic illness while not supporting your basal metabolic rate. If you're dealing with any of these issues, you need a substantial amount of energy, a substantial amount of healing, and we're just not going to be able to achieve that when you're not eating enough. And that's why I say the core foundation of root cause work is the diet. And it could be diet quality, it could be the macros and shifting them around, or it could be actually the volume of food and making sure that you're eating enough. So mold illness, chemical toxicity, Lyme, some of these immune issues, immune often comes with deficiencies. And so if we can boost up your immune system and really support it with a good quality diet, it's going to be far better than under eating, because it's just time and time again, I see we won't recover from these things if we're not eating enough.
I've definitely seen that in practice, like at a more extreme end, like where folks are like, oh, I've, read about this fasting protocol or something. And like, sometimes it's a good choice, but oftentimes, as you're, for folks who are just listening to the podcast, Leanne's making a horrified face, so giving the no way gesture. People can get really depleted. I've seen folks make themselves like quite a bit worse. It takes a long time to bounce back from it sometimes. So timing is everything. And it's usually better to nourish the body when it's in a super depleted state as opposed to restricting it. But we should switch topics here, Leanne, if you don't mind. I know it's my fault here that we're still on this topic, but I think it's a fascinating one. And again, I think a lot of folks will be interested in hearing about it, because of course, folks listening to this podcast could be at any phase of their healing journey. They might be in the throes of complex chronic illness. They might be 90% of the way out. And now they're like, oh, well, now I'm feeling better. It's like, I'm concerned about this extra 20 pounds or 30 pounds that I have on me. So I think it's still relevant to folks. I would like to pick your brain a bit about the functional blood chemistry. Not a lot of folks out there, I find, like on social media and whatnot, talk about it. And I'd love to hear your take. So would you be able to maybe just in the interest of time, just give us a quick little definition of what the heck is functional blood chemistry? And then would you mind sharing just maybe a couple of examples from your experience where it's been useful, or what kind of things you might look for in some ways that might apply to folks dealing with complex chronic illness, please?
Yes, Coles Notes version. Okay, so you go to your doctor, they say nothing's wrong with you. I looked at these labs, everything's good. And you're like, I feel terrible. I don't understand. Well, the doctor is generally looking at diagnostic levels, right? So are you super sick? Is something killing you? Okay, so it's good that you've gotten the green light from that doctor saying diagnostically everything looks okay. But we want to look at function. We want to understand what's actually happening within the body in those tight ranges. And so with functional blood chemistry, we're looking at not only tighter ranges, but we're also looking at how individual markers relate to other markers. So like in the case of liver, I talked a little bit about the alkaline phosphatase, the bilirubin, the GGT, the AST. If all of these 4 markers are high, it's a pretty good chance we have some biliary issues. If we see that even with a high LDH or a high iron, that's another case for, okay, now we're at 6 markers, now showing that there's probably a biliary issue. And so the art of functional blood chemistry is not just looking at individual markers saying high, low, normal, normal, high, low. It's, okay, well, if this marker is high, what are the other markers that relate to this marker that could give us more understanding within the pattern? So for example, with parasites, the parasite pattern generally is elevated eosinophils, elevated basophils, elevated monocytes, generally with low ferritin, anywhere between 25 to 35-ish. So if I see all 4 of those things, I'm going to say that's a pretty complete pattern. If I then see BUN being low, LDH being low, alkaline phosphatase being low, GGT being low, that's another 4 markers in that pattern that are completing that pattern. And so I like to think of functional blood chemistry, and this might sound kind of corny, but like a song. And really our goal as a practitioner is understanding what is the song that the body is telling us. It's not just one note, it's multiple notes within that song that tells us, are we dealing with parasites? Are we dealing with H. pylori or copper anemia we can see, or iron anemia, which people are familiar with, and most doctors will jump on that. We can see mast cell activation. We can see viruses. We can see heavy metals, low hydrochloric acid, digestive distress. All these different songs can be played within our blood work. And the more markers or notes that we see within this blood work, the more it completes that song of low hydrochloric acid or Lyme or those sorts of things. So that's kind of an introduction into functional blood chemistry. And I found it to be so helpful, even in my own experience. So a little quick story. I started working out about a year ago, and with my background of not eating enough for many, many years, I have to be just kind of on the lookout for adrenal issues that might happen. And over the last week, I felt kind of depleted. I went in for a basic blood work panel. It was $30. And within that blood work panel, I saw my sodium low, my chloride was low, my potassium was high. I'm like, yep, that's an adrenal pattern. I got to slow down. Those are basic markers. I think that those blood tests alone are probably $1. And that can give me phenomenal information about how hard I'm pushing and the fact that I need to back down a little bit. So we can use these in all settings. But the blood and the cells, which is what we're testing for, the cells respond so quickly to the environment. And so we can see how protocols are progressing and how we're doing based on standard blood work that costs a couple dollars versus, a mycotoxin test that might cost $200 to $450, depending on which ones you're running. And we can see the body's response to mycotoxins in blood work. So why wouldn't we start with blood work, see if we have those markers and symptoms, and then address accordingly and check on blood work as opposed to constantly running these mycotoxin tests, which can be quite expensive.
They are very expensive, to say very least. And if you don't mind sharing, Leanne, because I'm sure a number of folks listening would be like, oh, mold, like that's something that applies to me. What are some of the markers that you'd be looking at with like that might come up in someone who's mold toxic?
Yeah. So the reason I didn't give an example for mold is because it's quite a complicated song, quote unquote. Okay. So the mold pattern generally, we're going to see elevated monocytes. We're usually going to see low pH, low CO2, low ferritin, usually low A1C. Then it gets complicated, high or low. Okay. White blood cells, RBCs can be high or low, iron, total cholesterol, LDL. Generally, when I look at a cholesterol panel and I see it super, super elevated, I'm going to go more on the side of thyroid issues, parasites first, and just addressing the gut. If it continues to be elevated or starts dropping down, or I see a cholesterol panel that's super low, I'm thinking mold. If cholesterol is super tanked or LDL is super tanked, HDL is super tanked, thinking mold. Glucose when it's super low, HbA1c when it's high or low, CRP, ESR high or low, TGF beta 1 usually elevated. Yeah, that one, it's a really complicated song, and it takes a long time of a lot of labs to start seeing it and picking it out. Creatinine can be high or low, BUN can be high or low, uric acid, phosphorus, alkaline phosphatase, AST, ALT can all be high or low. So if we're seeing all these markers either super high or super low, generally in chronic mold, we're going to see all of that low. Like it's just going to be low, chronic. If we're seeing it elevated, usually a rule of thumb is if I'm seeing elevation, the body's still got some kick and vitality in there. When I'm seeing it low, the body is just like, I'm done. I'm out. This is chronic. And it's usually going to take a lot longer to recoup from that than it will a body that's still responding to the situation. When it stops responding, that's usually when we have an issue. But a good marker, if I could just answer really quickly, of like, I would look at cholesterol panel, and if you've been told multiple times your cholesterol is just really low, then I would think mold. That's just a general statement. It could be other things, but again, that mold mycotoxin pattern is a little bit complicated.
I think that's putting it mildly, Leanne, and I apologize to any listeners where your head is spinning right now. I know that was my fault for asking the question, and Leanne did warn us that it was going to be complicated, but thank you for sharing that. Just one thing to clarify, and I assume I know the answer from being familiar with functional blood chemistry myself, but when you say high and low, I'm assuming you're meaning like in the standard reference range, but kind of like high end of normal, low end of normal, like that's what you mean by high and low as a general rule, I assume?
Yeah, so this is the difficult part. And when we get to the how can people find out more about me, hopefully I can talk about my blood work course, because it's taken me about 3 years to kind of look at labs, listen to mentors, and kind of adjust these ranges based on what I'm seeing and what other practitioners are seeing. And so a general rule of thumb, yes, is to just look at the standard number range that you see on your labs and look if it's on the low end of normal or the high end of normal. Where that doesn't always work is markers like cholesterol, where they legit do not care how low your triglycerides are. I think for triglycerides in some place, it says like 0 to whatever. So it's like, you don't want your triglycerides to be 0. This is a bad idea. And so for certain things like that, it doesn't make sense. But for, your CBC with differential, which includes your white blood cells and red blood cells, it's a good way to kind of see high or low, kind of in between. You kind of want it like in the middle of most things. And yeah, if it's outside of the diagnostic ranges, then it needs to be addressed like now, functionally. If your doctor doesn't say there's something diagnostic going on, obviously.
Life is a never-ending hustle bustle, right? No matter how hard we try to just juggle things like responsibilities, endless to-do lists, it seems like it's impossible to live without overwhelm. Although I do try my best by saying no to a lot more things than most people, it's still, when we are stressed, it's affecting our overall well-being, our sleep, our productivity, our immune system, and our magnesium level. So here's what happens. This is the vicious stress magnesium deficiency cycle. Stress strikes, our body loses magnesium, sleep becomes elusive, energy and production plummet, stress then skyrockets and more magnesium escapes your body. And we just go in this loop. Out of all minerals that I test in my clients, magnesium and potassium are the two ones that are just deficient in most people. I don't think I've ever seen a hair tissue mineral analysis or chatted with an individual that had a good magnesium level, including myself. So when I determined that I was pretty dang low in magnesium, I tried all the things. I looked to magnesium glycinate and magnesium taurate and magnesium malate. And these are all really good forms, but an individual process just isn't going to cut it. When I switched over to Bioptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough, oh man, was it a game changer? Now, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium, which might support stress management by promoting muscle relaxation, regulating the nervous system, controlling stress hormones, enhancing brain function, boosting energy, and improving sleep. So me personally, I take 4 capsules a day. I would highly suggest starting off with like 2 capsules at bedtime and just watch it work. I would encourage you to just give it a shot and break free of this vicious, ridiculous magnesium deficiency cycle. And the great thing is that Bioptimizers has a risk-free 365-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't see results, tell them you hate it and simply get a refund. No questions asked. It's a win-win. So if you go to magbreakthrough.com/keto diet and use the code keto diet 10, you'll get 10% off anything that you order for a limited time only, and you'll receive some special gifts with your purchase. So if you go to magbreakthrough.com/keto diet, use the code keto diet 10, that's 10, you can get 10% off any order.
Thank you for that. And just where I know we're kind of winding down on time here a bit, Leanne, I know you also have a lot of wisdom around parasites as well. One of my favorite questions to ask, because I've talked to several other guests about parasites over the lifetime of the podcast. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what are just some of the top therapeutic agents that you've either recommended or seen, observed by proxy that have been the most effective, pharmaceutical versus non-pharmaceutical options? Can you do it all through diet? If we want to just kick some critters to the curb, what are some of the heavy hitters that you've found in your experience?
That's a very good question. I love more than anything killing parasites. It is like this, I don't know. I think I just love it so much. So first you need to know and not be discouraged that even if you try some of these things and you don't see parasites being passed, 30% are seen, 70% you won't. And so don't be discouraged if you're picking around in your poo and you see nothing. Because like Entamoeba histolytica, for example, you're not going to be able to see that. And I was always really discouraged, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. I just really wanted to see something. So in the case of my example, Entamoeba histolytica, I used a lot of different natural antimicrobials, but about a year and a half in, I was like, I got to use the heavy hitters. And I did 1 round of double antibiotic therapy. And that was I think it worked only because I had been at it for so long with natural means. And some individuals decide to do fully natural. Some, like me, do a combination. Others are like, I'm just going to go with the medication. I think the approach that I've seen most effective is a combination of both. When we have some serious heavy hitters, like in the case of Giardia or the Entamoeba histolytica, where you just need a combination of things generally, I would say my all-time favorite antimicrobial is Mimosa pudica. I love, love, love this because whether you have mast cell activation or you're chronically just totally flatlined, I find Mimosa to be the least likely to trigger any sort of Herx reaction or mast cell reaction, because a lot of these antimicrobials will. And so the Mimosa pudica, time and time and time again, is just fantastic. I love using solo herbals. They're probably my favorite, berberine and oil of oregano and those sorts of things. So we can really, if an individual is sensitive, if you have Lyme and you also have parasites, the last thing you want to do is do a multi herbal remedy that's super strong, because it will knock you on your butt and you will just hate doing it. I really like Vedanga and Artemisia, Mimosa we already talked about, the golden thread, also known as berberine. I like a good black walnut, but it depends on the individual and how much they're able to handle. And then for combo herbals, I'm in love with Cellcore. I use Cellcore more than any other brand when it comes to parasite killing and binders, because their binders don't need to be taken away from food, which is just such a pain when you're on so many different supplements to then take your binder away from food and take the antimicrobial on an empty stomach. And like your life becomes your supplements. And it's just, no. So I use a company called Cellcore more often than not when individuals can handle it. Yeah. And then just understand that full moon protocols, though they're effective for maintenance, it's not something to just like do if you think this is your first time with a parasite issue. You think you have parasites and you're like, I'm just going to kill these guys over 3 days during the full moon. It's just, that's not going to work. So you need to be more strategic in your operation. And I think, unfortunately, due to social media, there's just a lot of people that talk about the full moon thing. So yeah, just at least a month, maybe a little bit longer, individual herbals if you're sensitive, combo herbals if you're not, and medication if it's just not doing the trick. But more oftentimes than not, we can kill them with just herbal remedies. But some cases, including myself, I had to go for the heavy hitters. And
I'm assuming just to make sure that nobody's misconstruing anything here, I'm assuming that you're saying that it's probably not going to work to do a full moon protocol, just like say treating parasites 3 days a month, which I couldn't agree with more, but that I'm sure you've certainly had patients and acknowledged that, some folks definitely have worse symptoms around the full moon. Like I'm sure seen that pattern a number of times before.
Yes. Oh yeah. The full moon sucks. And once you get into maintenance, when you've killed off parasites, symptoms are way down. A good way to make sure that parasites don't set up camp long-term is the full moon protocol. But the full moon protocol is not something you do when it's like, I have a serious parasite issue. I'm going to cleanse for 3 days and kill these guys. It's just not enough time. Most parasites have a longer life cycle, which just means you're going to have to be on these things longer than 3 days is what I meant by that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I took. I just, wanted to make sure crystal clear.
Always a smart idea to make sure.
I think so. Well, Leanne, thanks so much for sharing all of this information with the listeners today. Just as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to ask you about just how folks can get in touch with you, or how they can access any offerings that you have online or whatnot, how they can find you on social media. Just before we jump into that, though, are there any parting words or anything that you wanted to mention to listeners that we haven't got into? I'm sure we could talk for hours longer, but any other big take-homes, or if not, that's okay, but just want to give you the chance.
I think the most important thing and the most common conversation I have with every client is that patience is required. A lot of the people that you hear sharing their stories, including my own, I started this journey in 2007. So I've been at this a really long time, working on my personal health, working with individuals, and this stuff takes time. My health is not perfect now. It's far better than it was. But I think the danger we have with any goals that we have in regards to our health, wellness, whether we're chronically ill, and I've been there, I've had months where I didn't get out of bed because I was so sick from mold and had no idea what was going on. And it's taken over a decade to get back to the gym and training and all those things. So just have patience for yourself, have grace for yourself, and understand that if you are shifting in symptoms by a couple % every month, that is a very, 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 very good goal. And try not to think so much about that end goal, but just those small progressive steps, because it can get really discouraging if you're looking at the big picture, and that can cause some issues in your mind, which then presents itself as symptoms. So just try to have patience and understand that setting little baby goals, like I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk in the sun. I remember having to set that goal and getting 3 minutes and having to sit down. And so just those baby goals, not I'm going to run a marathon in a year. That's just way too far off. And so have patience with yourself, grace for yourself, and make those mini goals. So I wish I would have heard that a lot more and actually believed it when I was really sick.
Well, take it from one who's been there, folks. So I think it's good advice. So yeah, some cases, of course, progress faster than that, but some are really slow. And you have two options: keep plodding along one step at a time, or give up. And man, just got to make that decision. But folks like us are there to help along the way, and we just move along as quick as we're able to. Well, thank you for sharing all of that, Leanne. So how can folks find you on social media? How can they work with you if you work with folks? Well, I know you work with folks all around the world, according to the wonderful bio that you sent me. So how can folks get in touch with you in various ways?
Yeah. So if you have Instagram, I'm at Leanne Vogel. That's LeAnnevogel. I also have a website, healthfulpursuit.com. If that's just like you don't even know how to spell healthful or pursuit, you're not the only ones. You can go to leannevogel.com and it'll redirect there. Within that space, I have a blood work course that just gives you those functional ranges that you can kind of look at your own blood work, sit down. It's less than $100 for the full course, including videos and the ranges and all the markers, which is like unheard of. And so just kind of sitting down with your blood work and making sense of it all the way through to working with me in a group setting, a macro setting, if you just need help with diet alone, or like full on root cause, getting in there, getting in the trenches and figuring out what is going on with your body. So all that is accessible through healthfulpursuit.com, or again, leannevogel.com if you can't spell either one. Oh yeah. And I have a podcast, the Keto Diet Podcast. We come up with episodes every Tuesday. I think we're at like episode 440 or something ridiculous. So there is a lot there for you to consume, all about just not only does it fit your macros, but what are the functional things that you should be thinking about if you want to live a lower carb lifestyle. So yeah, that's where to find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I will include links to all of those resources in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, just check the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, then it'll be in the comment section below. Thanks so much for joining me, Leanne. It was a wonderful chat, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Bryan. This was wonderful. Your questions were so great, and I hope that people learned all the things from us today. So thank you.
Thanks for the feedback. I hope so too. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. We will be back with another one in a couple of weeks.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned a little something that maybe I haven't shared here on the podcast. It's always nice for somebody to interview me and come up with topics that I just wouldn't think of educating you guys on. So again, you can find Dr. Bryan's work over on Overcoming Chronic Illness Podcast, or check out his website for all of his links, eastcoastnaturopathic.com. Okay, we'll see you back here for another episode. If you have any questions about what I shared today, you can go to healthfulpursuit.com/contact and ask me. That's it for today. I'll see you back here next week. Bye. Thanks for listening. Join us next Tuesday for another episode of the Keto Diet Podcast. Looking for more resources? Go to healthfulpursuit.com for keto meal plans, weight loss programs, low carb recipes, and oodles of free resources to get you going. The Keto Diet Podcast, including show notes and links, provides information in respect to healthy living, recipes, nutrition, and diet, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Keto Diet Podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without any representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.